Okay, so we now know how to create new schools. What we want to do in this lesson is to read or to get a school. So that's the U or the R, sorry, in our CRUD acronym. We're reading from the database. Okay, so let's implement this functionality. Right, so let's go back to our data. So data, schools.go. All right, and we will implement the get functionality. All right, again, we'll be passed in, get will be passed in an ID, and we will return a pointer to that school record along with an error if there is any. All right, so let's remove this placeholder code and let's start implementing. So the first thing we want to do is to ensure that there is a valid ID. Okay, and we've done this in the previous lesson, or sessions in the previous series, Introduction to Programming with Go, Web Development. And so all we did was to say if the ID is less than 1, because remember in Postgres, IDs start at 1. So if you have an ID less than 1, then we know that that does not match up with any record in Postgres. So I will just return nil for no record, and then I will return the error, record not found. That's easy enough. Okay, so let's assume that they do pass in a valid ID, then we will simply construct our query with that ID. So let's just create the query. All right, again, this is nothing new. So we will select, and notice I will list out all the fields instead of putting a star. Okay, I could have said select star, but we need to be explicit. So I want back the ID. I want back created at. I want back name, level, contact, phone, email, website, address, mode, and version from schools, where the ID is the one that is specified. So that's $1, right? Since there's only one placeholder. Okay, so that's our query. And so we'll just execute that query. Okay, but before we do that, we need to create a variable to hold the data that will be returned from this query. And so we've done this already. We have experience doing this. And so I will simply declare a school variable to hold the returned data. Okay, and so we're going to say var, we're going to call it school of type school. All right, so we're going to use that. And so all we have to do now is to execute our query. And of course, since something is returned, we will be using query rule. Okay. Good. So we're going to say error, and we're going to simply say m.db.query rule. And what are we going to pass in? Obviously the query and the parameter, which is ID. And then we will use the scan function to collect the results. So we're going to have, remember these results are going to go into the school variable that we have created here on line 91. So I'm going to say school.id, next line, school that created that. Okay, let's let me copy and paste this just to make it faster. Okay, so created that. Next thing we want is name followed by level. After level, we want contact. After contact, we want phone. After phone, we want email. And after email, we want website. And after website, we want address. And after address, we want mode. And finally, after mode, we want version. Now, please think about it. When we send the data to the database, we converted it to an array. And so when we read back that data, it's an array. So mode is an array. So what's going to happen, the data will be read back from the query, okay, as a text array. But remember in Go, we're using a slice. So what I have to do here is to use the same pq.array function. So pq.array, okay. And what this will do, it will take the data that we read in from the database and convert it into something that Go will understand, which is a slice. If we don't do that, we're going to get an error. Okay, so anything missing? Let's see. Oh yeah, to check for errors. So let's handle any errors. Right, so we're almost finished because this is something we always do. Okay. So if error is not equals to nil, then we need to check to see which type of error it is. So let's check if the results, or let's check the type of error. Okay. And so we're going to use a switch. Again, you're familiar with this, and we're going to switch firstly on checking to see if there was no record returned. Okay, so we're going to use the is function. We're going to pass in the error, and we're going to compare to see if it's actually a SQL that error no rows. Okay, so this one is what will be returned if there was no row return. So we're checking for that explicitly. And so if there were no rows, if there was no row returned, then we will simply return nil, no rows, and then we will return the error, error record not found. Now, if there are other errors, we'll just let that be the default. Okay, so let's have default, and the default will simply be returning nil and returning the actual error. Okay, again, this pattern, we've seen it many times. And obviously, since nothing is being returned, then we know that we will have no rows or no row. All right, so that's our if. Okay, so notice we prematurely return if there are errors, if there's an error. Now, if we successfully pass the handling of the error code, it means that there are no errors, right? And so we can say success, and then we'll simply return the address of school, okay, and then we'll return nil. All right, and that's how we can read back or read our data from the database. Okay. Again, this is the key point right here. We had to use pq.array the first time when you created the record to convert it to something PostgreSQL understands. And now when we're reading from PostgreSQL into Go, we need to use the same function to convert the data coming from Postgres into something Go can understand. Okay, great. So that's easy enough. And so the next obvious thing to do is to go back to our show handler, show school handler. So let me go here, API, schools, right? So not create school, but show school handler. Okay, so we have this portion which doesn't change, whereby we're reading the parameter to get the ID, checking for errors. Previously we hard-coded a school, but we don't need this anymore. Okay, so let's fetch. Okay, fetch means to read or to get. Let's fetch the specific school. Okay, and we have a function, a method that does that. So I'm going to have a variable named school, since that's what get returns. So to access get, I'm just going to say app dot models. Remember, everything is stored in a models. That's the schools model, and we want not the delete, not the insert, not the update, but the get. Okay, and it tells me that the get expects the ID, and the ID is ID, right? This ID here. Okay, so obviously an error will be returned, so we need to check for that, and we will simply follow the same pattern. So let's handle errors. Again, same thing. So if error not nil, we're gonna switch, and we're gonna switch on the checking for no row returned. Okay, so case errors that is, and we're gonna compare the error with data that error not found. Okay, so we're gonna compare if there are no record, or if there is no record, okay, then we know we have a problem. Right? Okay. So what are we supposed to do? Well, let's return an error message. So we're going to say app.not found response. W and R. Now, if that's not the case, then the default will be that something on the server, some error on the server occurred. So we're going to use the server error response message. Okay, and that's what we will do. Okay, so if we get past, missing one thing, if there are errors, we need to return. Otherwise, line 92 will be executed. All right, great. So check for errors. If there are errors, okay, then we're gonna do the not found response. If that's not the case, and if there's some other error, we're gonna do the server error response. And the last thing we do is to return so that we leave the handler. Right? Now, if we pass all of this and there are no errors, then the next thing we want to do is to write the response. Okay, so let me put a comment. So we're gonna write the data returned by get. Okay, so we're gonna write that status okay. The school, we don't need any headers since we're reading. And of course, if there are any errors, then we say that there was some internal server error. All right, so that was straightforward. And so the last step is to test. So let's start up a server. Go run. CMD, API. Great. Let's start up a new server. A new terminal. And let's test it out. The test is very easy. So all we have to do is to call curl. We want the headers listed. And we're just going to say local host. Port 4000, of course, version 1. And we want schools, but let's say we want with ID 1. Okay, and we get back ID 1 along with everything else. If I say I want record 2 or school with ID 2, do we have a 2? No, we don't. So it says 404 not found. Error. The requested resource could not be found. So it works. Okay. Let's do one thing just to show you what would happen if I did not use my array, pq.array. Okay. So what would happen if I did not do that? Okay. Let's save that. Let's try to compile. Okay. And then let's try to get some row 1, or not row 1, but record 1. Okay, so internal server error. All right, the server encountered a problem and could not process the request. If we go back to the server, it will tell me scan error, mode unsupported scan. All right, so there was an error because of this trying to convert from PostgreSQL array to Go's slice. And so that's the reason why we have pq.array, which does that conversion for us. All right, so if I go back to the code, okay, let's Command C. Okay, if I save that, and rerun and issue the same command again. It should work this time. Alright, good. So everything works as previous. So let me quickly commit this. So git add, git commit, implemented the get functionality. Okay. Yeah. Great. So git push, that's origin, main. Okay, and so we're good. I will see you in the next lesson, in the next video, where we will work on the U, meaning the updating part of CRUD, whereby the user will be able to update some school that was previously created. All right, so we'll see how to do that. I'll see you then.